am 52 years old, and for most of my life, I've been careful. Maybe too careful. I followed the path that was expected. Married young, raised 2 children, kept a tidy home, and did my best to hold everything together. I learned early that people appreciate a woman who doesn't ask for too much. Someone dependable, predictable, safe. For years, I told myself that stability was the same thing as happiness, that love didn't have to feel alive as long as it was steady. But I know now. I was wrong. Painfully wrong. I never imagined that a quiet, ordinary weekend in early June would unravel everything I thought I knew about myself. But it did. And I'm sharing this story with you today, not to confess, but to warn you. Don't let your life turn into something you simply maintain. Because one day something, or someone, might come along and remind you of everything you've buried. It started on a Friday afternoon, the kind where the air feels thick with heat and memory. I had just finished watering the garden when my phone buzzed with a message from Rachel, my closest friend since college. "Hey Kay, could Ethan stay with you for a few days? Dad's in the hospital, and I need to drive down to Tallahassee." I paused. Ethan, her son. I hadn't seen him in years. The last time I remembered, he was just a teenager, awkward, polite, quiet. But when he pulled into my driveway that evening, dragging a worn duffel bag and smiling at me from behind a short beard and tired eyes, I almost didn't recognize him. He wasn't that boy anymore. He was 27 now, taller, leaner, with a kind of grounded energy that spoke of time, distance, and maybe pain. "Thanks for letting me stay, Miss Garrett." I laughed and waved off the formality. "You're not 12 anymore. It's Diane, please." He smiled, and for a second his eyes lingered. I told myself it was just warmth, just familiarity. That night I made spaghetti, something simple, comforting. He said it was his favorite, and that his mom used to make it for every birthday. We sat across from each other at the small kitchen table, steam rising between us, and talked about life. He told me he'd been working construction out west. Long hours, small pay, but peace. He liked it that way. I told him about my garden, my daughter's engagement, and the book club I barely attended anymore. The conversation flowed easily, not like mother and son, but like 2 people who happened to meet at a quiet intersection of their lives. After dinner, he offered to wash the dishes, and I caught myself watching the way his shoulders moved under the light. Not out of attraction, at least, not yet, but out of something else. Something I hadn't felt in a long time. Presence. Someone in my home, sharing space, breathing the same rhythm. Later that night, I stepped outside with a cup of tea. The air buzzed with the sound of cicadas, fireflies flickering in the dark. Ethan was sitting on the deck, staring up at the sky. "You okay?" I asked softly. He nodded, then said, "Sometimes I wish I could just stop time. You ever feel that way?" I looked at him, the way the moonlight hit his face, the quiet honesty in his tone. "More than you'd think," I said. He smiled. A small, knowing smile. Then stood, wished me good night, and disappeared inside. But I stayed there, under the stars, tea growing cold, my heart oddly awake. It wasn't attraction. At least, that's what I told myself. It was recognition. The kind that reminds you you're still alive. The next day started quietly. I made pancakes, my Saturday ritual, and he helped clear the garage. We played old Fleetwood Mac songs while we worked. He knew every lyric. I teased him about his taste, and he laughed, saying, "My mom raised me right. She listens to all your playlists too." It felt easy, natural. By late afternoon, the sun was heavy, and I suggested we cool off in the pool. I hadn't been swimming in years, but somehow the idea sounded right. When I stepped outside, he was already in the water, eyes closed, floating. I watched for a moment, not because of how he looked, but because of the stillness he carried. Like he'd learned how to be present in a world that never stops moving. "Come on in," he said without opening his eyes. The water was warm from the sun. We splashed around, laughed, and talked about everything and nothing, work, regrets, what we'd change if we could go back. At one point he said, "You don't smile much, do you?" I blinked. "Ido." He shook his head. "You pretend to. But when it's real, it lights up your whole face." That line stayed with me. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every quiet moment of the day replayed in my head. The laughter, the way he noticed things no one else did. Not just the way I smiled, but the way I avoided eye contact when I was unsure. He saw me, not as someone's mother, not as a wife or a homemaker, but as a woman with thoughts, stories, and layers. For the first time in years, I felt seen. It terrified me. And yet, I didn't want it to stop. By the third day, the weather changed. Heavy clouds rolled in from the west, thunder low and distant. We stayed inside. I lit candles, and we ended up sitting on opposite ends of the couch flipping through an old photo album I hadn't opened in years. He pointed to a photo of my kids, muddy boots, faces wide with laughter. "You were a good mom," he said softly. I smiled. "I tried." He looked at me for a long time. "You still are." Those words landed somewhere deep. Sometimes in life, it isn't grand gestures that change you. It's moments, small, quiet human moments, that remind you who you used to be before the years blurred your edges. That weekend, something inside me woke up. Not because of Ethan, but because of what he represented. He was a mirror, reflecting back the part of myself I'd forgotten. The woman who once dreamed, who laughed loudly, who believed that love should feel alive. When Sunday came, Rachel arrived to pick him up. They hugged, exchanged quick updates, and then he turned to me. "Thank you, Diane, for everything." His words were simple, but his eyes, they said more. When his car disappeared down the road, the house fell silent again. But it wasn't the same silence. It was fuller somehow, like the echo of something I couldn't quite name. In the days that followed, I found myself seeing the world differently. Colors looked brighter. The air smelled sharper. Even my reflection in the mirror seemed a little less tired. No, there was never anything romantic between us. But there was truth. A reminder that connection, real connection, doesn't ask for permission or age or definition. It just happens. And when it does, it changes you. I started doing things I hadn't in years. Painting, gardening barefoot, calling my daughter just to say hi. I began living like I was part of the story again. Not just maintaining it. If there's anything I've learned, it's this. Don't wait for someone else to wake you up. Don't wait until you're 52, staring at your own reflection, realizing that stability isn't the same thing as joy. Be bold enough to feel, to laugh loudly, to live messily, because one day something or someone might remind you of what it means to be alive. But wouldn't it be better if you remembered it yourself first? After Ethan's car disappeared down the street, the silence in my house felt different. For years, quiet had been my normal, comforting even. The sound of clocks ticking, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant rustle of trees outside. But now, the silence pressed differently against me. It wasn't peace anymore. It was awareness. Every corner of my home seemed to echo with moments from that weekend. His laughter drifting from the deck, the clink of plates as he helped with dishes, the soft thud of footsteps on the stairs. I wasn't missing him, not exactly. I was missing the feeling he left behind. The aliveness. The reminder that I was still capable of connection. That night, I couldn't sleep again. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan turning slowly above me, realizing how much of my life had been lived in quiet half measures. Not because I didn't have choices, but because I was afraid to want more. The next morning, I pulled out an old journal from the back of my closet. The pages were yellowed, the ink faded. I used to write in it every week, little notes about dreams, goals, places I wanted to see. The last entry was dated 2003, 22 years. I read the lines like they belonged to someone else. Back then, I had plans to travel, to learn photography, to start a small business. Somewhere along the way, those dreams quietly dissolved under piles of grocery lists, soccer games, and bills. That morning, I picked up a pen again. Not because I had anything profound to say, but because I needed to hear my own voice again. The first line I wrote was, "I'm still here." A few days later, I went to a local coffee shop I hadn't visited in years. It used to be my favorite, a small brick building with creaky floors and handwritten chalkboard menus. When I walked in, the same barista from years ago, now grayer, softer, smiled. "Haven't seen you in forever, Diane." I smiled back. "Yeah, life got busy, I guess." I ordered my usual, a vanilla latte, and sat near the window. The world outside looked the same, but I didn't. I pulled out my journal again and began writing. Not about Ethan, but about me. What I wanted. What I missed. What I was afraid to admit. For the first time in years, the words came easily. Later that evening, my phone rang. It was Rachel. "Hey, I just wanted to say thank you again for letting Ethan stay with you," she said. "He told me you two had some really good talks." I smiled. "He's a great kid." Then quickly corrected myself. "Man. He's a great man." Rachel laughed softly. "Yeah, he's been through a lot. He said you reminded him what home feels like." Her words hit me like a wave. I didn't realize how much I'd needed to hear that. That even after all these years, I could still mean something to someone. 1700 hours. The mirror moment. That night, after the call, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror. For the first time, I really looked. The faint lines around my eyes, the gray threads in my hair, they weren't flaws. They were chapters. Proof of life lived. I remembered how, at one point, I used to hide from my reflection. I'd glance quickly, just enough to make sure I looked presentable. But now, I held my gaze. Because that woman staring back at me, she wasn't invisible anymore. She was waking up. It started with little things. I rearranged the living room, bought new bedsheets in colors that made me happy, signed up for a pottery class at the local community center, something I'd once told myself I didn't have time for. Every small change felt like a rebellion against the version of myself that had stopped trying. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. It wasn't about proving anything. It was about remembering. 2 weeks later, I got a letter in the mail. Handwritten. No return address. Inside was a small postcard with a photograph of a desert sunset. The handwriting was familiar. "Hey Diane, made it back to Colorado safely. Thanks for reminding me what peace looks like. Eh." I smiled. It was short. Simple. But it carried weight. I placed the postcard on my fridge, not as a keepsake of him, but as a reminder of the moment my life started to shift. From there, the changes accelerated. I started taking morning walks again. Cooked new recipes just for myself. Joined a small book club downtown. Not the one I'd half-heartedly attended before, but a new group that discussed travel memoirs. One evening, a man named Sam sat next to me. Kind eyes, salt and pepper beard, gentle voice. We talked for hours about photography, about how both of us had forgotten how to slow down. When I drove home that night, I realized something important. This, connection, laughter, curiosity. This was what life was supposed to feel like. That summer, my garden flourished. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe not. Every morning I'd step outside with coffee in hand, dew still on the leaves, sunlight catching on petals that seemed to glow. It's funny, for years I thought flowers were just decoration. But now I saw them as something else. Proof that beauty blooms again after neglect. Just like people. In late August, Rachel called again. "Ethan's passing through town next week," she said. "He wanted to stop by and say hi if that's okay." I hesitated for a moment, then smiled. Of course. When he showed up, I barely recognized him. Same kind eyes, but lighter somehow. More at peace. We sat on the porch, sipping lemonade and talking about everything and nothing. "You seem different," he said. "In a good way." I laughed softly. Maybe I am. Maybe I finally stopped trying to hold my breath. He smiled. "Good. You deserve to breathe." After he left again, I stood there in the doorway for a long time. It wasn't longing I felt this time. It was gratitude. He'd walked into my life at the exact moment I needed reminding. Not of romance, but of possibility. Sometimes people come into your story not to stay, but to wake you up. It's been over a year now since that June weekend. My house still creaks in the same places. My life still carries its routines. But I am not the same woman anymore. I've learned that being alive isn't about chasing thrill. It's about staying awake to your own existence. Noticing the light, the sound of laughter, the smell of rain. Every person you meet, every season that passes, leaves an imprint. And if you pay attention, really pay attention, you start to realize that life isn't slipping away. It's unfolding. So if you're watching this right now, Maybe you're in your 40s, 50s, 60s, and you feel like your life has settled into something smaller than it used to be. I want you to hear me. It's never too late to wake up, to chase joy, to find yourself again. You don't need permission to start living differently. You just need to decide that your story isn't finished yet. Because it's not. The best parts of your life aren't behind you. They're waiting, quietly, for you to notice them again.